The full story is that that bunch of folk on the left are always around, and they're not all just bystanders. And even when they are bystanders, they still have relationships with folk, which means that we need to be aware of the relationships between the members of the core team, the folk at the bus stop, the bystanders around us. So there are a mass of people, and our stakeholder analysis is not just about where are they on the grid. We need to go a bit further than that. So here's the grid again, and I hope that my project sponsor, the investor, is up in this corner. They are powerful and they are positive. And I expect normally the project manager is somewhere like this. They are enthusiastic, they don't have the political power on their own, and they don't have the skills to deliver the technical work on their own. They do have the skills to forge the team, and the team are the folk who are going to deliver the activity that delivers the outputs that mean that we succeed and they get their what's in it for them. And I hope that the judgment group, the authorizers of investment, are somewhere around here. They are knowledgeable, powerful, but neutral. And there will be other folk like the bystanders. The operational folk within the organisation are typically somewhere around here. Individually, they don't have an awful lot of power. And they are concerned about what change will bring to them. They're not necessarily anti-change, but they are anti-change forced upon them that they have no influence on, and they don't know what its content is. And that's simply a position of being fearful that change can have positive or negative effects on us, and mostly we anticipate that things will be negative, not positive. So there's a community of folk there, and maybe there are other folk around the organisation. What we need to understand then is how we're going to deal with these folk, and most importantly, what about the folk who are powerful and actually negative. Now, quite often the reason for the negativity is maybe it's they disagree with what we're doing, but often it's competition for resources. Maybe there's somebody here sponsoring an initiative that requires a project manager with access to resources elsewhere in the organisation. So often when we find that there are stakeholders with negative feelings, it's not actually about what we're doing, it's about the fact that what we're doing is making it harder for them to get their objectives delivered. Now, they will have to talk to that neutral community for the allocation of resources. So I hope that my sponsor understands that their role is to have a very strong and clear message in a two-way direction with that stakeholding community, or with that resource holding community. I also want them to have good communications down to the project manager and possibly straight down to the team, but I'd like the chain of command to be sponsor to the person who does the day-to-day control, and from there down to the folk who do the day-to-day work. And I think that communications should include all of the social aspects of knowing who your people are, and definitely what motivates them, what their interests are, who their families are, etc. This is a picture, though, about communications, and if we're going to draw the communications picture, we need to include upon it the formal communications of the delegation of goal and the escalation of status information, and that needs to be a clear stream of governance information. Now, as well as this information and these flows, there are very many other flows that are prevalent in the organisation, and we do need to, in our communications planning, to be thinking about them, because the thing that is important to recognise is that if you're in a leading or project managing position, while you are engaged in communication a lot, it's not a case of all of the communication all of the time should feed through you. If you create that situation, you become a bottleneck because there are all the communications flowing through you, and you become a dampener or filter of the messages because you won't understand them all, because they won't all be relevant to your expertise. So there are many information flows going on around the organization, and the thing to recognize is that you need to know who to connect to who. So the project manager's, project leader's role in communications is not to be part of every communication, but is to ensure that every communication that needs to happen is created, and when it doesn't need to happen anymore is dissolved. And that sometimes that means things like you have to have a conversation with people who you then hope, expect, create the circumstances for they're amplifying and passing that message on. And maybe my arrows here should have been double-headed arrows. So the communications planning is not just who are the stakeholders and what are their opinions, but it's who influences who needs to communicate with who, using what mechanisms, on what frequencies, with what feedback loops, and with what confirmations. So a much more important component to the communications is building the plan that says the project manager is not the center of all of the project communications. In fact, one of the key things to recognize is that while the project manager is, for example, the source of status data to the sponsor and the senior leadership in the organization, the sponsor and the senior leadership are the communicators to the project manager of much information such as the goal and the politics and the boundaries and constraints. Okay, we've covered the 80% really. Now let's have a look and put this into the context of the whole journey.